Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, Tutorlini Test Prep. Today we'll be going over Ottocento number 8, Average Rate of Change and Slope Proportions. The goal of the Ottocento course is to teach students everything they need to know about the digital SAT math exam. Please see the link in the description to download this video's worksheet for free. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is average rate of change. The average rate of change of a function f over the interval a is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to b is given by the equation f of b minus f of a over b minus a. So this is a very robust and probably confusing definition that you would see in an Algebra 2, pre-calculus, or calculus class. However, you don't really need to know it in this much detail the vast majority of the time on the test. So I'm going to give you another definition, which you'll probably find a lot more favorable. And this I want you to write down for sure. So pay close attention that the words rate of change are often interchangeable with the word slope. So what we can do is to find the average rate of change is we can find the slope of the straight line connecting the two interval endpoints. And once we do that, we can use the slope formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So you see with these types of questions, basically all you're going to do is pick out the two endpoints and use the slope formula. Let's look at an example. Okay, so it says that the restaurant X is the number of days after February 1st, and it wants us to find the average rate of change from February 5th to February 10th. So what we're going to do is to find X for each of those dates is we're going to subtract those dates from 1 because it's asking us the days after February 1st. So for February 5th, we're going to do X equals 5 minus 1. February 5th from February 1st to February 5th, so 5 minus 1 gives us 4. And for February 10th, we're going to do 10 minus 1, and that gives us 9, so 9 days after February 1st. And we're now going to pick those X values out from the picture. So first we'll try to pick out X is 4. Next, we'll try to pick out X is 9. Okay, and we can circle those 2 points. And if we want, we can draw a little line between them. I didn't really do a good job making it perfectly straight, but you guys kind of get the idea. We're trying to find the slope of the line connecting those two dots. And now we're going to write down those points because this is a digital test, so it'll probably be much easier if we write it down on our scratch paper. So we're going to write down the first point, which I believe is 4, 9. And the second point is 9, 7. And just a note, guys, this is really hard to do on a computer screen for a digital test. So I highly suggest, like, while you're writing down on your scratch paper with your one hand, you physically take your non-dominant hand and hold it up to the screen and kind of point at it so that you can make sure you're looking at that dot the entire time you're writing it down. You don't want to go write down the X coordinate and then all of a sudden your eyes wander to a different point and you write down a different Y coordinate. That would be really bad. So physically use your pointer, your index finger, to help you kind of track which points you're looking at. This is a million times easier to do on a paper test because you can physically circle the dots like I did. But I digress. Okay, so now we don't need the drawing anymore. We just need to find the slope. So let's go on to a new slide. We're going to call one of these points x1, y1, and we're going to call the other point x2, y2. It doesn't matter which. And we're going to put them into the slope formula. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So in this case, 7 minus 9 over x2 minus x1, 9 minus 4. And at this point, whenever you want, especially if it's going to be a fraction, don't be afraid to just go straight to a calculator. So I can put this into Desmos, and it tells me -2/5. You could also put -0.4, and that would be the answer. That's pretty much it for these questions. So let's move on to the other topic, which is slope proportions. So for these questions, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to identify which letters represent x and which letters represent y. Then you're going to identify the change given in the problem. Then you're going to write the slope proportion. Then you're going to identify the slope from the given equation. And then you're going to set up your proportions, set them equal, and solve. To do that, you're going to cross multiply and divide. This will all make sense when we do an example in a minute. And make sure, guys, that when you do these questions, you probably want to understand that slope is change in y over change in x. A really shorthand way that we write that in math is we use the Greek letter delta, which is like that little triangle. So this is delta y over delta x, but the top means change in y, and the bottom means change in x. So a change meaning like an increase or a decrease. So hopefully that helps. Let's do an example so you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about. Okay, so this one, pay very close attention to that first sentence. It says the total cost C and then produces a quantity of X units. So first we're going to write M equals delta Y over delta X. Now we're going to pick out which letters are Y and X in this problem. So in this problem, if you kind of mentally put Y equals MX plus B over the top, you can kind of see that C is your Y and X is your X. So we're going to rewrite this statement as delta C over delta X because C was our letter for Y and X was our letter for X. Now we're going to look at the question and try to figure out what change they told us. So the change they told us was the quantity of units produced increases by 48. So increases tells me it's a change of positive 48. Now I need to figure out if it's a delta C or a delta X. Well, if you read the first sentence very carefully, do you see how it talks about the quantity of units is represented by X? So that's a delta X. So we're going to put positive 48, because it's an increase, on the bottom, because that's where delta X is. And for the top, which is the change you're trying to solve for, you can put whatever letter you want. Maybe you don't want to use X because there's already like an X in the problem. I oftentimes use the letter C for change, but there's actually already a C in this problem, cost, so I didn't want that to get confusing. So just use the letter N. Again, I don't know, you could even just put a question mark or something. Just put whatever letter you want there. So now that guy we just came up with from the problem is going to be equal to the slope. And the slope in the equation is the coefficient of X, which is 8/3. Now we're going to set those two guys equal. N over 48 equals 8 over 3. And this is, if we cross multiply, we get 3 times n, which is 3n, equals 8 times 48, which should give you 384. And now we are going to divide both sides by 3. And you should get 128 for n. And I would check with the phrasing of the problem, just like we do with percents, to make sure it kind of makes sense. So do you see how in the question it says, what's the corresponding increase? So we would expect to get a positive answer. So if we got a positive answer, that's a good sign that we did a good job. So that's probably our answer, n equals 128. Okay, so you might be wondering, well, Kyle, can't I just plug in numbers? And the answer is you can, right? So look, this is what I did on Desmos. I typed the function in, and then it says increase by 48. So why don't I plug in 0 for x, and then plug in 48 for x, and then find the change between them. And you see, if you do that, you also get 128. But there's a couple reasons why I would suggest you don't do this. For starters, this is going to get more difficult when you have negative numbers. This is going to get way more difficult and easy to mess up if you have fractions, because if your answer is a messy fraction, messy repeating decimal, then you might not, sure, if you're even just like 1,000th off for your decimal, it's going to get marked wrong. So that kind of introduces a chance to get it wrong if you're not really careful with your function notation and the signs and putting enough decimal places and all that. But the third and most important point that I want you to do this mostly by hand, is understanding slope simply helps you get other questions right. If you don't understand that slope is change in y over change in x, when you go to do a question, that multiple choice question that asks you to interpret the slope, you're not going to understand how to answer it. So the better you understand slope, the better you will be for other topics on the test. All right, so let's do a much harder one where maybe the by hand method tends to shine a little bit better. Okay, so slope is delta y over delta x. Now we're going to pick out y and x from the problem. And you're going to see, guys, that when they give you function notation, that almost makes it, like, kids get scared of function notation, but it almost makes it easier because the letter in front of the function notation is your y, and the letter inside the parentheses is your x. You don't even need to look at the other side. So we're going to write delta f over delta x because f was our y, our output, and x was our x, our input. Next, we're going to look at the question. So it says a temperature decreases by 7.3 degrees Fahrenheit. So this, you have to pay really close attention, guys, because they're both temperatures. So I see that F is the temperature in Fahrenheit. But for another problem, X could totally be the temperature in Fahrenheit. So make sure you pay very close attention to that. So that is telling me that delta F is negative 7.3 because it's a decrease. So next to delta F, we're going to put a negative 7.3. And then the other change is the thing we're trying to solve for. So why don't I put, how about lowercase c for change? So negative 7.3 over c. Next, we're going to pick out we're going to find the slope in the equation and set those guys equal. So the slope in this equation, you could distribute that 9/5 and then combine all the like terms. But you see, guys, inside the parentheses, there's a 1 in front of the x. So hopefully you can kind of just see with your mind's eye that 1 times 9/5, and there's no other x terms. It's going to give you 9/5 anyway, so you can go through all that if you want, but you don't have to for this one, at least. So we see that the slope is 9/5. And we're going to set those guys equal. So negative 7.3 over c equals 9/5. And we're going to cross multiply, so we should get 9 times c, which is 9c, and then 5 times negative 7.3, which is negative 36.5. Now we're going to divide both sides by 9, and you can just do this on a calculator. You should get c equals negative 73 over 18, and that is, I got a minus sign, followed by 5 characters, 7, 3, division, 1, 8. So that would be an acceptable final answer if this were a student-produced response. So hopefully that helps. So you can kind of see that as these questions get more complicated, understanding how to do it by hand and knowing that slope is change in y over change in x can be really helpful. I also think it is really, really important that you use the letters in the problem because it helps you figure out where to put each change. If you just wrote delta y and then tried to do in your head, oh, is 7.3 a change in y or a change in x? It's kind of unclear, right? But if you write delta f, you go, okay, f maybe probably has something to do with Fahrenheit, so I should put the 7.3 on top, or negative 7.3 on top. So that kind of helps a lot. Okay, it's time for the final review. Remember to download the free final review worksheet using the link in the description. Try to complete the worksheet yourself before watching the rest of the video. And be on the lookout for a pinned comment with more helpful links about today's topic. Okay, we're back. Let's get started with question 1. This one talks about something about momentum. The context isn't super important. It wants to know the average rate of change in Newton seconds per second. It's kind of a mouthful, but notice what they did, guys, was the units of y go in front, and then the units of x go after, because per, remember we talked about previously, per means division. So this is just like Newton seconds, units of y over units of x, Newton seconds per second. So they're just getting that from the picture. You don't really need to know that, but it's helpful to understand. Okay, we want to go from x equals 0 to x equals 4. So we're going to pick out 0 and 4, and we're going to circle these guys. And we're going to very carefully jot them down. Hopefully I don't mess this up. So the first point is 0, 2. And the second point is 4, 9. And we're going to use the slope formula. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And we're going to do, how about 9 minus 2 over 4 minus 0. And let's see, that should give us a nice fraction, but also a nice decimal. So 7/4. You could also put 1.75. That terminates nicely. Pretty much if it terminates nicely, I don't mind using the decimal, but if it doesn't, I feel like I should definitely use the fraction. Great, and if you want to, just to drive this home, basically we're just finding the slope of that line. Okay, for the second part, we're going to look from x equals 5 to x equals 8. We don't care about anything else in between. I'll use a different color. So 5 is here, and 8 is here. So we're going to do 5 and 8. And okay, so that first point is 5, 10, I think. And that second point is 8, 14. So let's write that down. 8, 14. So I'm going to do m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Average rate of change. And let's see, 14 minus 10 over x2 minus x1, 8 minus 5. So that should be that should simplify. You should get 4. No, it's already simplified. You should get 4 over 3. And that's going to give me a repeating decimal, so I'll just leave it as 4/3. I don't see any reason to use the decimal. I would just put 4/3 as my answer if this were a student-produced response. Great, and always just do a final check. We got positive numbers. Does it make sense for us to have a positive slope? It kind of does, right? Both these line segments are going up as you go from left to right. So it makes sense to have a positive slope. So we're at least somewhat positive that we did it right, providing we wrote the points down correctly. So 0, 2, 4, 9, and then 5, 10, 8, 14. Looks good to me. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so we've got wind. This looks important. It says X is the number of hours after 1 a.m. We're probably going to need that at some point. I'm going to underline that. We want the average rate of change in miles per hour per hour. That is so annoying, right? So the Y is miles per hour, and then it says per, and the units of X is hours. So once again, guys, change in Y over change in X. Per just means division. So units of Y per unit of X. Even though miles per hour kind of like, you know, maybe it doesn't make much sense to us, you see it is correct. Okay, anyway, not important. So we want to go from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. So 11 a.m. minus 1 a.m., that's an X of, that's 10 hours. Now, for 5 p.m., it's like, okay, so if I'm going from 1 a.m., if I add 12, that would put me at 1 p.m. And then 1 p.m., another 4 hours to 5 p.m. So it would be 12 plus 4, which I believe is 16. So this would be X is 16. So we're going to go from X is 10 to X is 16. So it seems like that is this point, X is 10, and this point. And we are going to find the average rate of change between them. Let's always, of course, this is a digital test, right? So let's jot them down. So 10, 11 to 16, 7. And let's see what we get. So m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I'm going to do 7 minus 11 over 16 minus 10. 7 minus 11 over 16 minus 10. Make sure you're going in the same direction, guys. Let's see what we get. 7 minus 11. Okay, so it should be negative 4 over 6, which is, and I just put this in a calculator, is negative 2/3. I'm not going to use a decimal just because it doesn't terminate nicely, so I don't want to use it. Okay, so negative 2/3 would be our answer. Great. So you see kind of the challenge of these questions, guys, is like you have to, sometimes the question is like, what points is it asking me about, right? It's like once you find the 2 points, it becomes very straightforward. But sometimes finding those 2 points, like coming up with this 10 and 16 was a little confusing, I think. Okay, this one's interesting. It says, what is the greatest average rate of change between 2 readings? So that just means like consecutive. So like this line segment, this line segment, this line segment. And greatest. So remember, guys, it's slope. Average rate of change is just equivalent to slope. So it wants you to find the slope between the 2 line segments. And the greatest slope. So the greatest slope would be the steepest positive slope. So that's what it's looking for. The greatest slope. We want a positive slope, and we want the steepest positive slope. So hopefully you don't have to calculate a bunch of them. Hopefully they make it kind of obvious. And it seems to me like the steepest positive slope is here between these 2. That definitely seems the steepest to me. Right? There's only a couple other positive slopes and they're not that steep. So this one will probably give us the largest value. So we're going to write those down. So 6, 6. And 8, 17. And we're now going to do the slope formula. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So what is that? 17 minus 6 over 8 minus 6. Let's see what that gives us. 17 minus 6, 8 minus 6. So it would give you 11 over 2. But that one actually does come out nicely. So why don't we just call that 5.5. If you're not convinced, I encourage you to go through and calculate every single slope in between these readings, in between 2 readings, and you'll see that the largest value should be that one. Great. Okay, let's keep going. All right, now we're going to move on. The rest of the questions are on slope proportions. Each of these equations corresponds to like a page. So we've got the function k gives the temperature in kelvins, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we're going to do m equals delta y over delta x. Function notation, so y is just that letter and x is just that letter. So I'm going to rewrite that as delta k over delta x. And the temperature, it says, increases by 31.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, x degrees Fahrenheit, so that's a delta x of 31.5. And delta k is what we want to find. So why don't I put c for change? And I'm going to set it equal to the slope. Well, it looks like the slope, even if I distributed all this, I would still see that the slope is 5/9. So I'm going to put 5/9. Now we're just going to look just here and cross multiply and divide. So 9c, so that's 9c, and 5 times 31.5 is 157.5. And now we're going to divide by 9, and we should get a nice answer of 17.5, I believe. So that is our change. Corresponding temperature change in kelvins, 17.5. And you see if you put it back in, if you did 17.5 divided by 31.5, you would get 5/9, which is what you would expect to get. So great, let's keep going. Okay, same kind of deal here. I'm gonna just kind of gloss over this part. So delta K over delta X. It's the same equation, so the temperature decreases by 41 kelvins. Okay, so that is a change of -41, and it's kelvins, which is K. So we're going to put that on top this time. -41 over C. The change is the delta X, which is what we want to find. And we're going to once again set that equal to the slope in the problem, which is 5/9. And we're now going to cross multiply and divide. So 5C equals -41 times 9, -369. And now we're going to divide both sides by 5, and we should get a C of -73, a change of -73.8 for our answer. Okay, great. Let's keep going. Okay, very similar. So we are going to do M equals delta Y over delta X. The Y is the letter outside the function notation, and the X, the input, is the letter inside. So we're going to do delta R over delta X. And we are increasing by 58 degrees Rankine. Well, Rankine is the R. So we're going to put a positive 58 on the top. And this change is what we're trying to find, see? And that is equal to the slope in the equation, which is 9/5. So let's put equal to 9/5. Now we can once again just look at that guy at the end and cross multiply and divide. So we're going to do 9C. What is 58 times 5? 290. And we're going to divide both sides by 9. And we get a big messy repeating decimal. So this simplifies to, I mean, it doesn't simplify at all. It's just 290 over 9. So I'm going to put that as the answer. You could input a decimal answer, rounding or truncating, but remember, we could mess that up. So there's really no reason not to use the fraction, so long as the fraction fits within 5 or 6 characters on the Blue Book app. Anyway, personal preference, I just like to use the fraction if it's a messy decimal. All right, let's keep going. So we can kind of skip over this part because it's the same equation, delta R over delta X. It says it decreases by 4.7 degrees Celsius. Now, there's no C in the problem, but remember, guys, Celsius is the X variable. So we're going to put a negative, because it's a decrease, 4.7 next to X, delta X. We'll put C for change on top. And we'll once again set it equal to the slope, which is still 9/5. And now we're going to cross multiply and divide, just looking at this guy on the edge here. So 5C, what's negative 4.7 times 9? Negative 42.3. Hopefully I didn't make any mistakes crunching these numbers. Now we're going to divide both sides by 5. And we get a C of negative 8.46. And that terminates nicely and fits in the 5 or 6 characters. So I think I'll just put that as my answer. Great. Okay, there's just another one here. So if the percent genomic content, first of all, I'm going to write this is Y and this is X. So I'm going to write M equals delta Y over delta X. So this time it's delta T and X is P, so over delta P. And it says this guy percent genomic content increases by 6. Okay, that is the P. So the P increased by 6. So we're going to put positive 6 on the bottom and a C on top. and we're going to set it equal to the slope, which is 0.28. Now, how about, to make the math kind of easier to see, we go ahead and change that to a fraction right before we do anything. So I'm going to go to Desmos here, and I'm just going to really quick 0.28 and click on the fraction. It tells me 7 over 25, so the slope is 7 over 25 written as a fraction. So let's just kind of rewrite that up here. You don't have to do that, but I feel like it makes it easier to kind of understand. Okay, 7 over 25. And now we're going to just solve this guy. So we get 25c equals with 7 times 42. And now we're going to divide both sides by 25. And we should get 1.68. All right, let's do question 10. Same kind of thing. We don't really need to, we don't really need to redo that part of it. Figuring out what y and x are. Okay, the melting temperature decreases by 8.2. Okay, so that, remember, melting temperature is T. So we're going to do a negative 8.2 because it's a decrease. We're going to put C on the bottom. That's the change we're trying to find, the change in genomic content, change in P, delta P. And we're going to set that equal to our slope, which we said was 7 over 25. And now we're going to cross multiply and divide. So we get 7c equals 25 times negative 8.2. It's negative 205. I'm going to divide both sides by 7. And I really don't want to deal with the messy decimal there. So it is just negative 205 over 7, and that is a acceptable amount of characters to put into the Lubick gap. So no reason why I wouldn't use the fraction, right? I feel like reading that decimal, you're more likely to misread and make a mistake on that messy decimal than on the fraction. So I'm going to put negative 205 over 7, which is 5 characters plus a negative sign, which is acceptable. All right, I think that's everything. Let's go back to the slides. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for watching my video. Comment below your thoughts on the video and worksheet. Did you find them helpful? Please remember to like the video and subscribe for more digital SAT math content. It really helps the channel out. And if you are interested in my tutoring services, my website is linked in the description. I tutor SAT math and all math subjects from about 7th grade to AP/early college level. Thanks for stopping by, and good luck studying.